The barcode scanner beeped. Again and again. Claire's hand trembled, unable to grip the item properly. A customer huffed loudly behind her. Jesus, it's not rocket science. But from 2 aisles down, an older man paused, his eyes narrowing at the faint tattoo on her wrist. And just like that, his entire stance changed. Her name tag read Claire D. She looked like any other cashier at the busy hardware superstore. Polite, a little pale, early 30s maybe, brown ponytail pulled back tight, no makeup, gray polo shirt tucked neatly into dark work pants. But her left wrist told a different story. Barely visible beneath the hem of her sleeve was a black ink tattoo, a coiled snake wrapped around a trident, flanked by the letters M.A., Master at Arms, Navy Military Police. Claire Donovan had once commanded security checkpoints in Bahrain, handled high-risk detainees in Djibouti, and escorted diplomatic convoys through regions where the rules of engagement changed by the hour. That was before the explosion, before the long months recovering in Landstuhl Regional Medical Center, before the VA psychologist whispered the acronym that would reshape the next 6 years of her life, PTSD. Now she scanned bags of fertilizer and garden hoses under the harsh flicker of fluorescent lights, a world away from war zones and combat operations. But the fight hadn't left her. It just looked different now. Some battles, she'd learned, followed you home and never really ended. They just waited for the right trigger, the perfect storm of sounds and smells and memories to pull you back into the darkness. Claire had good days and bad days. Today was shaping up to be one of the bad ones. Most mornings, Claire managed just fine. She kept a routine, took her prescribed medications exactly as directed, avoided crowded spaces during her lunch break, stayed away from loud noises and sharp, overwhelming scents. Her therapist called it managing environmental triggers, though Claire preferred to think of it as survival. But sometimes, like today, the shadows found a way through her carefully constructed defenses. The customer in front of her was getting impatient. A burly contractor type in paint-stained jeans and steel-toed boots, he tossed a pack of titanium drill bits onto the counter with more force than necessary. "You gonna scan that, or are we just standing here for fun?" Claire blinked slowly, trying to focus. Her fingers felt stiff, uncooperative. She reached for the package, but her hand wouldn't close properly around it. Beep, beep, beep. The same barcode scanned over and over. The register rejected the duplicates with an angry electronic chirp. "I said scan it one time," the man snapped, his voice carrying across the checkout area, loud enough for other customers to glance over with mild interest. Claire tried to steady her breathing, but something was wrong. Very wrong. The register's error light pulsed red and insistent, looking too much like the blast warning beacon she'd seen that day during the convoy attack. The monotonous tone of the barcode scanner mimicked the exact pitch of an incoming mortar alarm, and that cologne, spicy, sharp, with notes of sandalwood, triggered a memory she couldn't quite place but knew she didn't want to revisit. Her throat began to close. Her chest tightened like a vice. She was 32 years old, standing in a suburban hardware store on a Tuesday morning. But in that moment, she was 24 again, crouched behind an up-armored Humvee with her sidearm drawn and someone else's blood soaking through her boot. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed like insects. The air conditioning system hummed like distant helicopter rotors. Everything was closing in. "Hello? Earth to Cashier, girl?" The contractor barked, waving his receipt aggressively in front of her face. "You gonna finish this transaction, or do I need to call over someone who actually knows how a register works?" The words hit Claire like physical blows. Her vision started to tunnel. Her hands were shaking visibly now, and she could feel the familiar cold sweat breaking out across her forehead and down her back. From 2 aisles away, someone had been watching. Commander Frank Ellis had retired 5 years ago after 31 years in the United States Navy. He wasn't wearing a uniform today, just faded Levi's, worn work boots, and a battered baseball cap with a barely visible USS George Washington patch stitched to the front. He didn't need insignias or rank pins anymore. 3 decades of command presence did all the talking he needed. He'd been shopping for replacement parts for his deck railing when he noticed the commotion at checkout lane 1. At first glance, it looked like any other impatient customer giving a retail worker a hard time. But something made him look closer. Maybe it was the way the young woman's shoulders were hunched defensively, or the way her breathing had become shallow and rapid. Then he saw it. Just a glimpse, barely visible beneath her sleeve as she reached for another item to scan. But Frank Ellis knew that tattoo. He'd seen variations of it on hundreds of sailors under his command over the years. He stepped forward quietly, his movements deliberate and calm. He noted the cashier's pale complexion, the sweat beading at her temples, and the fine tremor in her hands. Classic signs. He'd seen them before, in young sailors returning from deployment, in seasoned petty officers who'd seen too much, in his own mirror some nights when the dreams got too vivid. "That's enough," Frank said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd spent decades being instantly obeyed. The contractor whipped around, eyes flashing with irritation. "Mind your own business, old man." Frank didn't blink. He didn't raise his voice. He simply lifted his hand slowly, pointed directly at Claire's wrist, and said in a tone that brooked no argument, "What's your rate, sailor?" Claire looked up, startled and confused. For a moment, the panic receded slightly, replaced by the automatic response to authority that had been drilled into her during 8 weeks of boot camp at Great Lakes. "MA2, she whispered, her voice barely audible but steady. "Master at Arms, Second Class. Djibouti, Camp Lemonnier. Bahrain, Naval Support Activity, 2010 to 2016. Frank nodded once, a gesture of recognition and respect. "I figured as much. That snake around the trident, not something you see every day, not something you forget either." The contractor scoffed loudly, apparently unimpressed by this exchange. "What's any of that got to do with scanning my damn drill bits?" Frank turned toward him with the slow, measured movement of a man who'd commanded respect in every corner of the world. His voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath it now. "It means this woman served her country while you were complaining about customer service. She's earned a little patience." The silence that followed was profound, not just from the contractor's stunned expression, but from the quiet that had fallen over the entire checkout area. Other customers had stopped their conversations. Even the background music seemed to fade. They suddenly realized they weren't standing in line behind just another retail worker having a bad day. They were behind a veteran, a protector, a survivor. Someone who had signed a blank check payable to the United States of America for an amount up to and including her life. Claire felt the tightness in her chest begin to ease slightly. The tunnel vision started to clear. She lowered the drill bits slowly, carefully, and scanned them once with a clean, clear beep. Her hands were still shaking, but she managed to complete the transaction with something approaching her usual efficiency. The contractor mumbled something unintelligible under his breath, grabbed his receipt and bag, and left without making eye contact with anyone. Frank didn't move from his position near the checkout lane. "You okay there, sailor?" he asked softly, using the informal term of address that somehow felt more genuine than any official title. Claire nodded, biting her lower lip to keep it from trembling. "Just one of those days, you know, sir." "I know," Frank said simply. "Believe me, I know. You're not alone out here." He tapped his chest, right over his heart. "Once Navy, always Navy. That's not just a saying. That's a promise." Claire managed a small, genuine smile for the first time in hours. "Thank you, sir." "Really?" Frank gave her a respectful nod, then turned and walked toward checkout lane 3 with his deck railing supplies. On his way out of the store, he paused by the customer service desk and had a quiet word with the store manager. 10 minutes later, Claire's shift supervisor appeared at her register with a cold bottle of water and a gentle smile. "Hey, Claire, why don't you take the rest of the day off? Full pay, don't worry about it. Sometimes we all need a break." The supervisor, a middle-aged woman named Janet who'd managed retail teams for 15 years, had seen her share of difficult customers and stressed employees. But something about the conversation she just had with the older gentleman in the baseball cap had moved her. She'd never served in the military herself, but her brother had done 2 tours in Afghanistan. She recognized the signs Frank had quietly pointed out. As Claire gathered her belongings, Janet made a mental note to check in with her more often. Not in an intrusive way, but with the kind of quiet support that sometimes made all the difference. As Claire headed toward the employee parking lot, she noticed something different in the way people looked at her. Not with pity or awkwardness, but with a quiet acknowledgement she hadn't felt in years. The elderly woman from earlier caught her eye and nodded respectfully. A store employee she barely knew gave her a small wave. Even the security guard by the exit straightened slightly as she passed. Outside in the parking lot, Claire sat in her car for a moment before starting the engine. The autumn air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of fallen leaves instead of diesel fuel and dust. She rolled down the windows and let it fill her lungs. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel oppressive. It felt peaceful. She touched the tattoo on her wrist, the one that had once represented the hardest and proudest years of her life. Today, for the first time in a very long time, it didn't feel like a burden she was carrying alone. Veterans live with PTSD, quietly navigating civilian life while carrying the invisible weight of their service. They work in grocery stores and offices, teach in schools, and repair cars and garages. You may not always notice them, but sometimes all it takes is a tattoo, a tone of voice, or a moment of genuine compassion to truly see them. The bonds forged in service don't end with discharge papers. They last a lifetime. They walk among us every day, fighting battles you can't see, carrying burdens you might not understand. If you believe these stories matter, if you think these quiet heroes deserve to be remembered and honored, subscribe to Echo Bravo. Because every tattoo has a story, every uniform has a history, and every veteran deserves to know they're not forgotten.